My parents said 2 years in prison would not kill me, speaking as casually as if they were asking me to pick up a gallon of milk. They placed my sister's federal crimes on the table and tried to force her future onto my shoulders to save a wedding. But they forgot that I traced dirty money for a living. So that night, instead of calling a lawyer to defend myself, I called a mobile notary to end them. My name is Aspen Roberts, and standing in the center of my parents' study felt less like a family reunion and more like a secret tribunal where the verdict had been decided before the gavel even hit the wood. The room smelled of lemon polish and expensive, unread leather-bound books. The only light came from the green banker's lamp on the mahogany desk, casting long, distorted shadows against the walls. It was a room designed to intimidate, to make you feel small, and at 29 years old, I was intimately familiar with the feeling of shrinking whenever I stepped across this threshold in Haven Ridge, Connecticut. My father, Douglas Roberts, did not offer me a seat. He sat behind his desk, his fingers steeple-tapped together, looking at me with the same dispassionate scrutiny he usually reserved for an underperforming stock portfolio. My mother, Patricia, was perched on the edge of the velvet wingback chair, her hand resting protectively on the shoulder of my older sister. Sloane was weeping, or rather, she was performing the act of weeping. I watched her shoulders shake with a rhythm that seemed just a beat too calculated. She held a lace handkerchief to her eyes, careful not to smudge the waterproof mascara that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Douglas did not speak immediately. Instead, he placed a hand on a thick manila dossier sitting in front of him and slid it across the polished wood. It stopped inches from my waist. The sound of the heavy paper scraping against the mahogany was the only noise in the room. "Open it," Douglas said. His voice was not angry. It was terrifyingly calm. I reached out. My hands were steady, though my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I flipped the cover open. It was a financial autopsy. My eyes scanned the documents, bank statements, tax returns, IRS notices. The headers were all for a company called Larkspire Collective LLC. I saw wire transfers that made no sense. I saw investor funds moving into personal accounts. I saw credit card bills for luxury vacations categorized as business development. It was a textbook case of embezzlement, tax fraud, and wire fraud. It was sloppy, greedy, and absolutely criminal. And every single document was signed by Sloane Roberts. "She is in trouble, Aspen," my mother said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Deep trouble." I looked up from the file. "This is prison time," I said, my voice flat. "This is federal. The wedding is in 4 weeks," Douglas cut in, ignoring my assessment of the penal code. 4 weeks, Aspen. Do you understand what happens if this comes out now? The Kingsleys are old money. They have auditors. They have lawyers who check the bloodlines of their horses, let alone their future in-laws. If Ethan Kingsley finds out his fiancée has been running a Ponzi scheme to fund her wardrobe, the wedding is off. The merger between our firms is off. We are ruined. I looked at Sloane. She lowered the handkerchief, revealing eyes that were red-rimmed but dry. She looked terrified. Yes, but not of the law. She was terrified of losing her status. "So fix it," I said, closing the folder. "Pay it back. Hire a defense attorney." "We cannot pay it back fast enough," Douglas said. "And a defense attorney brings attention. We need this to go away quietly. We need a fall guy, or in this case, a fall girl." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. I looked from Douglas to Patricia, and then to Sloane. I realized then that I wasn't called here to help brainstorm a solution. I was the solution. "We have arranged everything," my mother said, standing up and walking toward me. She reached out, smoothing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. A gesture so motherly it made my skin crawl. "The lawyer says if someone takes responsibility, claims they were the acting financial officer, that they misled Sloane, that she was just the creative face of the brand while the finances were mishandled behind her back, then Sloane is a victim. She keeps the engagement. She keeps the life she was meant for. And the person who takes the blame? I asked. It is a first offense, Douglas said, leaning back in his chair. White-collar crime. A plea deal is standard. You would not go to a high-security facility. Then came the sentence that would echo in my head for the rest of my life. My mother looked me dead in the eyes, her expression soft, reasonable, almost loving. 2 years in minimum security will not kill you. Aspen. She said it with the same casual tone she might use to suggest I switch to a different brand of shampoo. 2 years, 730 days. They were asking for 2 years of my life to save a wedding reception. I felt a scream building in my chest, a primal rejection of their madness, but I did not let it out. I knew my parents. If I screamed, if I fought, if I showed them the rage boiling in my veins, they would see me as an enemy. They would attack. They would use their money and their connections to bury me before I even left the driveway. I had to be smarter. I had to be what they thought I was. The spare, the weak one, the disappointment. I let my shoulders slump. I forced my hands to tremble visibly as I touched the dossier again. I lowered my eyes to the floor, staring at the intricate patterns of the rug. My voice cracked. I cleared my throat and tried again. I do not know what to say. Say yes, Sloane whispered. It was the first time she had spoken. Please, Aspen, you do not have a career to lose. You do not have, a reputation. Ethan will leave me. Please. I need time, I whispered, looking at Douglas. I cannot just say yes right now. I need to think, Douglas frowned, checking his watch. We do not have time. Aspen, the auditors are coming next week. 24 hours, I pleaded, injecting a note of desperate, pathetic fear into my voice. Just give me 24 hours to wrap my head around it. Please, I will come back tomorrow night. Douglas and Patricia exchanged a look. They saw the trembling hands. They saw the broken posture. They saw a daughter who had spent 29 years seeking their approval, who was now being given a chance to finally be useful to the family legacy. They thought they had won. 24 hours, Douglas agreed. But tomorrow night, you sign the confession. We will have the papers drawn up. Okay, I breathed. Okay. I turned and walked out of the study. My legs felt heavy, like I was wading through wet concrete. I walked down the grand hallway, past the portraits of ancestors who probably would have sold their children for a tax break, too. I opened the heavy oak front door and stepped out into the biting Connecticut night. The cold air hit me like a slap, sharp and clarifying. I walked to my car, a 10-year-old sedan that looked like a stain on their pristine driveway. I got in, locked the doors, and drove. I did not turn on the radio. I needed the silence. I drove until the lights of the Roberts estate were just aglow in the rearview mirror. I kept driving until I reached the edge of town. Pulling into the deserted parking lot of a closed gardening center, the asphalt was cracked. Weeds poking through the fissures, illuminated by a single flickering street lamp. I put the car in park and killed the engine. Has anyone else ever been used as a human shield by the people who were supposed to protect them? I asked the empty car. My voice sounded strange in the small space. My hands were shaking for real now. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving behind a cold sweat. I gripped the steering wheel, breathing in through my nose, out through my mouth. 1, 2, 3. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a generic office drone who pushed paper and lived in a studio apartment because I lacked ambition. They thought my request for 24 hours was the hesitation of a coward. They were wrong. I wasn't asking for time to find the courage to submit. I was buying time to reload. I reached into the passenger seat and grabbed my laptop bag. I pulled out my computer and set it on the center console. I opened the lid. The screen came to life, casting a harsh blue light across my face. It was the only light in the car, sharp and clinical, to them. I was Aspen, the disappointment. But to the Hawthorne Vale Recovery Group, I was a senior asset tracing analyst. I hunted money for a living. I found things people tried very hard to hide. My parents had put a gun to my head. But they had made a fatal error. They assumed the gun was loaded. They didn't know I was the one who manufactured the bullets. I cracked my knuckles. The screen cursor blinked, waiting for a command. It looked like a small, rhythmic heartbeat, or perhaps the edge of a knife. 24 hours, I whispered to the glowing screen. Let us see what I can find in 24 hours. I began to type. Growing up in the Roberts household, affection was not an infinite resource. It was a finite commodity, like a single pie cut into slices, and for as long as I could remember, whenever my parents finished serving Sloane her share, there was nothing left on the plate for me but crumbs. I sat in the dark car, the hum of the laptop fan the only sound in the silence, and thought about the economics of my family. To Douglas and Patricia, we were not just children, we were investments. Sloane was the high-risk, high-reward stock, the one they poured capital into hoping for a massive payout in social status. I was the treasury bond, low yield, boring, safe, something you kept in a drawer and forgot about until there was an emergency and you needed to liquidate some assets. Tonight was the liquidation event. I looked at the wallpaper on my laptop. It was a generic landscape, nothing personal. It fit the life they thought I lived. To my parents, I was a dull office drone, a mid-level clerk who filed papers and stared at spreadsheets all day. They told their country club friends I worked in data administration. It sounded harmless. It sounded mediocre. It sounded like exactly the kind of job the slow daughter would have. They never asked for details. In 5 years. Not once had my father asked. So, Aspen, what exactly do you do? If he had asked, he might have hesitated before sliding that dossier across the desk. I am a senior asset tracing analyst for Hawthorne and Vale Recovery Group. We are not the people you call when you want to file your taxes. We are the people you call when your husband claims he is broke during the divorce proceedings. But you know he just bought a villa in the Cayman Islands. We are the people banks hire when a CEO declares bankruptcy while wearing a watch worth $50,000. I do not just read spreadsheets, I interrogate them. I can look at a bank statement and tell you where a person slept, what they ate, who they were cheating with, and exactly how desperate they were feeling on a Tuesday afternoon. I track digital footprints through shell companies and offshore trusts. I hunt money for a living, but my parents did not know that. To them, I was just Aspen, the girl who lived in a 400-square-foot studio apartment on the wrong side of town, while Sloane was posting Instagram stories from a spa in Tulum or a yacht in the Mediterranean, tagging them with captions like manifesting abundance and entrepreneur life. I was reheating instant noodles and wearing a winter coat I had bought secondhand 3 years ago. It was not that I was poor, I made a good salary, but I saved everything. I lived small because I knew, deep down, that a day like this would come. I knew that one day, the Roberts family credit line would run dry, and I would need an exit strategy. Sloane's entire existence was funded by the bank of Mom and Dad. They called it seed capital when she wanted to start a boutique jewelry line. They wrote a check for $20,000. It failed in 6 months. When she wanted to become a lifestyle coach, they paid for the website and the branding photos. That lasted a year. And now, this Larkspire Collective, another vanity project disguised as a business, another bottomless pit for my father's money. They enabled her. They crippled her with their generosity. They taught her that consequences were things that happened to other people, usually poor people. And now that the consequences were finally knocking on the door, wearing a federal badge, they expected me to answer it. I scrolled through my mental Rolodex of Sloane's social media. I remembered a post from 6 months ago. She was holding a glass of champagne, leaning against a railing that looked like it belonged to a private balcony. The caption read, "New beginnings, so grateful for investors who believe in my vision." I had liked the photo. I had even commented. Congrats, I realize now, with a cold, sinking feeling, that the investors were likely the very people she had defrauded, and the vision was just a way to funnel cash into her personal checking account. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was not that they hated me. Hate requires passion. Hate requires energy. This was worse. This was indifference. They did not look at me and see a villain. They looked at me and saw a spare part. A spare tire does not get to complain when it is pulled out of the trunk and bolted onto the axle to drive through the mud. That is its job. That is why you keep it. You do not polish a spare tire. You do not show it off to your neighbors. You use it when the premium tire goes flat, and then you discard it when it is worn out. 2 years, my mother had said. She had priced my life. She had done the actuarial math in her head. Aspen's freedom is worth less than Sloane's wedding. Aspen's future is worth less than the family reputation. The exchange rate was set. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. Hot and fast. I wiped it away angrily. This was not the time to grieve the parents I never had. This was the time to survive the parents I did have. They thought they were dealing with a frightened daughter who would do anything for a scrap of approval. They thought they were manipulating a naive girl who would take the fall to keep the peace. They did not realize they had just handed the murder weapon to the detective. I opened a new terminal window on my screen. The black background reflected my face, ghostly and pale. I was not going to be their shield. I was not going to be their martyr. They wanted me to look at the numbers? Fine, I would look at the numbers, but I was not going to stop at the dossier they gave me. I was going to dig until I hit bedrock. I was going to find every hidden account, every laundered dollar, and every secret transaction they thought was buried deep enough to hide from God. They forgot the most important rule of asset recovery. The money always leaves a trail, and I am the bloodhound. I cracked my neck. The sound sharp in the quiet car. Let us see what you are really worth. Mother and father, I whispered. I typed in the URL for the credit bureau portal. It was time to see just how much damage they had already done to my name. It was time to stop being the daughter and start being the analyst. They thought I was a sacrifice, but they forgot that if you mishandle a sacrifice, you do not just lose the offering, you burn down the entire temple. The blue light of the laptop screen cut through the darkness of the car, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the stagnant air. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, trembling slightly, not from cold, but from a sickening anticipation. I navigated to the credit bureau portal, a site I visited daily for my clients but had not checked for myself in over a year. Why would I? I paid my rent on time. I had no debt. I drove a car that was fully paid for. In my mind, my financial health was the one thing I owned completely. I typed in my social security number. It felt like punching in the code to a bomb detonator. The security questions popped up. Which of the following addresses have you lived at in the past 5 years? I selected my studio apartment. What is the model of your vehicle purchased in 2016? I selected the sedan I was currently sitting in. What is your mother's maiden name? I typed it in. The irony tasted like copper in my mouth. That name belonged to the woman who had just told me prison would not kill me. I hit enter. The loading circle spun, round and round. It felt like it was buffering my entire life. Then, the dashboard loaded. I gasped. The sound sucked all the oxygen out of the car. 514. My credit score was 514. That was not just bad. That was catastrophic. That was the score of someone who had declared bankruptcy or simply stopped paying their bills altogether. It was a red flag so bright it burned my retinas. My real score should have been in the high 700s. I clicked on the tab labeled Revolving Accounts. The list expanded, and my stomach dropped through the floorboard. There were 3 credit cards I had never seen before in my life. The first was a Platinum Rewards card opened 3 years ago. Credit limit of $15,000. Balance? $14,980. Status? Past due. The second was a travel card opened 2 years ago. Limit $10,000. Balance? $10,400. Over limit. Late fees applied. The third was a luxury department store card. Limit $20,000. Balance? $18,000. I did the math in my head. The numbers screaming at me. Over $43,000 in credit card debt. $43,000 spent on clothes I never wore. Trips I never took. and dinners I never ate, but it was the next section that made my blood turn to ice. Installment loans. There was a single entry, glowing with the terrifying label, default. It was a business loan. Principal amount, $50,000. The entity listed was Larkspire Collective LLC, my sister's company. I clicked on the details, my hand shaking so hard the cursor skittered across the screen. I needed to see the paperwork. I needed to see how this was possible. The digital summary stared back at me with cold, hard facts. Primary borrower, Larkspire Collective, LLC. Personal guarantor, Aspen Roberts, a personal guarantor. That meant if the company failed to pay, the guarantor was liable for everything. My parents had not just used my name to open a few credit cards. They had leveraged my entire legal identity to underwrite Sloane's failure. They had signed my name on the dotted line, legally binding me to her incompetence. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I almost opened the car door to be sick. This was not a mistake. This was not a clerical error. This was theft. But I needed to know how. How did they get the verification codes? How did they bypass the alerts? I clicked on the Personal Information tab at the top of the report. This section usually listed current addresses and contact numbers. I scanned the list of phone numbers. There was my old landline, my current cell, and then a third number. I recognized it immediately. It ended in 4545, my father's private cell phone. I looked at the email address on file for alerts and recovery. It was not mine. It was an address ending in. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They had not just stolen my identity. They had curated it. They had set up a shadow version of me. For years, every time a bank sent a fraud alert, it went to my father's phone. Every time a statement was generated, it was emailed to my father's inbox. They had been intercepting the warnings. They had been managing the decay of my financial soul while I sat at their dinner table on Thanksgiving, eating dry turkey, completely unaware that they were cannibalizing my future. I looked at the address history. 12 Oak Creek Lane, my parents' house. The billing address for every single one of these fraudulent accounts was their house. I sat back against the seat, the leather cold against my neck. This changed everything. This was not a desperate, last-minute plan hatched to save a wedding. This was a lifestyle. For years, they had looked at me and seen a resource to be mined. They kept me in the dark, encouraged me to live simply, not because they wanted me to be humble, but because they needed my credit capacity to remain open for their use. I was not a daughter. I was a line of credit. My instinct was to drive straight to the police station. I had the evidence right here on my screen. I could walk in, show them the report, show them the contact info that linked back to Douglas Roberts, and have them arrested before breakfast. But then my training kicked in. I thought about how this would look to an outsider. I was the sister. I was listed as a guarantor. The alerts went to a family number, a sharp defense attorney, and my father would hire the best, would spin this in a heartbeat. They would say I was a willing participant. They would say I was the silent partner in Larkspire Collective. They would say I agreed to help my sister, and now, because the business failed, and I was jealous of her marriage, I was trying to claim fraud to get out of the debt. Without a smoking gun, it was my word against theirs, and their word was worth millions in this town. My word was worth a credit score of 514. If I went to the police now, I risked everything. I risked being painted as the mastermind who got cold feet. No, I needed more. I needed them to admit it. I needed undeniable, irrefutable proof that I had no knowledge of these accounts. I reached into my bag and pulled out an encrypted external hard drive. I plugged it into the USB port. I started working. Capture mode. Click. Screenshot of the credit score. Saved. Click. Screenshot of the credit card balances. Saved. Click. Screenshot of the Larkspire loan default with my name as guarantor. Saved. Click. Screenshot of the contact information linking Douglas Roberts to my identity. Saved. I downloaded the full PDF report, officially timestamped. I moved the files into a VeraCrypt volume, locking them behind a password that would take a supercomputer a century to crack. Then I opened a spreadsheet, I began to build a timeline. Column A, date of account opening. Column B, my location on that date. Column C, the transaction history. I saw a charge on the Amex card for $3,000 at a ski resort in Vail, Colorado, dated 2 years ago. I checked my own calendar. On that day, I was in the office in Hartford, billing 12 hours on a divorce case. I had the timesheets to prove it. I saw a charge for a luxury handbag in Paris. On that day, I was at the dentist getting a filling. The evidence was piling up. It was a mountain of betrayal, built brick by brick over 3 years. I closed the laptop lid, plunging the car back into darkness. My heart had stopped racing. In its place was a cold, heavy resolve. It felt like a stone in the center of my chest. They wanted me to take the fall for the tax fraud in the dossier. They wanted me to go to prison for 2 years to cover up Sloane's mess. They thought they were asking me to sacrifice my future. They did not know that they had already stolen my past. I looked out the windshield at the desolate parking lot. A stray cat darted across the asphalt, disappearing into the shadows. "Fine," I whispered to the empty night. "You want me to take the blame? I will take it." I started the engine. The headlights cut through the dark. "But I will take it in a way that makes you sign your own death warrant." The 24-hour co-working space on the edge of the industrial district was called the Nexus. It was a sterile, glass-walled environment that smelled of ozone and stale espresso, inhabited mostly by insomniac coders and freelancers running on caffeine and desperation. It was my war room. I scanned my badge, found a corner cubicle away from the security cameras, and set up my station. I did not open my personal email. I did not check the news. I opened the proprietary software I used for work, logging in through a ghost server to mask my IP address. If I was going to dissect my family, I was going to do it with the same surgical precision I applied to hostile corporate takeovers. I pulled up the registration documents for Larkspire Collective, LLC. On the surface, it looked legitimate. There was a fancy logo, a registered agent, and a vague mission statement about curating bespoke lifestyle experiences for the discerning modern elite. It was the kind of word salad that meant absolutely nothing but sounded expensive. I dug into the financials. Since I had my own social security number and the guarantor information from the credit report I had just pulled in the car, I could legally request a pull of the business credit profile attached to my name. The bank statements began to populate on my screen, row after row of data. I started tracing the inflows first. Where was the money coming from? There was a deposit from 6 months ago, $200,000. The source was a trust fund managed by the Sterling family. I froze. The Sterlings were cousins of the Kingsleys. They were part of the inner circle of the family Sloane was about to marry into. I looked at the pitch deck attached to the loan application. Sloane had promised them a beta access to a luxury concierge app that would rival anything in Silicon Valley. She had sold them equity in a platform that did not exist. There was no developer on the payroll. There were no server costs. There was not even a domain name registration for an app. It was pure air. Then I looked at the outflows. A legitimate startup spends money on product development, marketing, and legal fees. Larkspire Collective spent money on Sloane. There was a lease payment for a Range Rover, categorized as company vehicle, $2,000 a month. There were flights to Milan and Paris, categorized as market research, $15,000 in a single week. There were consulting fees paid to a woman I knew was Sloane's sorority sister, who worked as a yoga instructor. But then, the pattern shifted. I scrolled down to a series of large, irregular payments made 3 months ago. $12,000 to Masterson Slate and Roofing, $8,000 to Vintage Cellar Solutions, $5,500 to Haven Ridge Country Club. I frowned. Larkspire Collective did not have a physical office. It was registered to a P.O. box. Why would a digital concierge company need a slate roof? I pulled up the invoice image for the roofing company. My eyes scanned the bill to section. It said Larkspire Collective, but then my eyes slid to the service address section, 12 Oak Creek Lane. My breath hitched. That was my parents' house. I pulled up the invoice for the wine cellar installation. Service address, 12 Oak Creek Lane. I pulled up the country club payment. It was for annual membership dues. The member name listed was not Sloan. It was Douglas Roberts. I leaned back in my mesh chair, the cold light of the monitor stinging my tired eyes. I had assumed my parents were just enablers. I thought they were protecting Sloan because she was the golden child, the fragile princess who could not handle the real world. I thought they were covering up her mess to save face. I was wrong. They were not just covering for her, they were eating at the table with her. My father, the respected investment banker who lectured me on fiscal responsibility every Christmas, was using his daughter's fraudulent company to pay for his new roof. My mother, who cried about the shame of a scandal, was drinking wine stored in a cellar paid for by stolen investor money. They had turned Sloan's fraud into a family slush fund, and they had used my credit, my name, and my future to guarantee the whole operation. It was a perfect, parasitic ecosystem. Sloan brought in the money by charming the rich neighbors. My parents spent the money to maintain the illusion of their own wealth, and I was the fuel. I was the one they would burn when the engine finally stalled. I looked at the total debt again. Between the credit cards in my name and the business loans I had unknowingly guaranteed, the total liability was pushing 6 figures. If I went to the authorities now, without a plan, the narrative was already written. The prosecution would see a company guaranteed by Aspen Roberts. They would see expenses that benefited the Roberts family home. They would see Sloan Roberts, the charming socialite who would weep on the stand and say her accountant's sister. Aspen told her it was all legal. My parents would back her up. They would say I handled the books. They would say I insisted on paying for the roof as a thank you for letting me live rent-free during college. I was too entangled. The mud was already up to my neck. If I struggled now, I would just sink faster. I needed leverage. I did not just need to prove I was innocent. I needed to prove they were guilty in a way that offered them no escape. I needed to corner them so completely that their only option was to confess. I closed the bank statements and opened a property search for Haven Ridge. Connecticut, I typed in 12 Oak Creek Lane. The deed came up. Douglas and Patricia Roberts. I checked the mortgage history. They had bought the house 30 years ago. The market in Haven Ridge had exploded in the last decade. The house was currently appraised at $1.8 million. But more importantly, I looked at the lien history. They had refinanced twice, but the last mortgage release was recorded 5 years ago. The house was nearly paid off. It was the only thing they actually owned that had real, tangible equity. Everything else, the cars, the clothes, the status, was likely leased or bought on credit. But the house? The house was their fortress. It was their pride. It was the physical manifestation of the Roberts family name. I stared at the aerial photo of the house. I could see the new slate roof. The gray tiles looked pristine in the satellite image. "You bought that roof with my life," I whispered. A cold, dark plan began to form in the back of my mind. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It bordered on extortion. But it was the only way out. If I turned them in, I would spend years in court fighting the charges, bankrupting myself in legal fees while my credit remained ruined. But if I could make them give me the house, if I could trick them into transferring the asset to me to protect it from the imaginary auditors, I would hold the keys to their kingdom, and to do that, I needed them to sign a document. A document that would look like a property transfer on the surface, but underneath would be a sworn affidavit of their crimes. I checked the time. It was 3 a.m. I had promised them an answer in 24 hours. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had used a dozen times for hostile asset seizures. It went to voicemail. "Dana," I said to the recording, "it is Aspen. I need a mobile notary. Tonight, 8 p.m., total discretion. Triple your usual rate, and bring your official seal." I hung up and looked back at the screen, at the house that sat on a foundation of lies. I was not going to send them to prison, not yet. First, I was going to evict them from their own lives. The sun had not yet risen over the industrial park when I began the construction of my trap. It wasn't built of steel or iron, but of paper and ink, the kind of cage my family would walk into willingly. believing it was a shelter. I started with the vessel. I needed a container for the asset I intended to seize, something clean and untraceable to the Roberts name. I navigated to the Secretary of State website for New Mexico. Unlike other states that broadcast ownership details to anyone with an internet connection, New Mexico offered privacy, no member names required on the public filing, just an organizer and a registered agent. I typed in the name, Juniper Ridge Holdings, LLC. It sounded innocuous, pastoral, even. It sounded like a retirement community or a small landscaping firm. It did not sound like a weapon. I paid the expedite fee with my personal debit card, the one card I knew was clean, and watched the confirmation screen flash green. The entity was born. I was now the sole managing member of a ghost. Next came the paperwork. This was the delicate part. It had to be a magic trick. I had to show them one thing while I was doing another. I opened my legal drafting software. I needed 3 distinct layers of documentation, stacked like a house of cards. Layer 1. The quitclaim deed. This was standard. It stated that Douglas and Patricia Roberts were transferring the property at 12 Oak Creek Lane to Juniper Ridge Holdings, LLC, for the sum of $10 and other good and valuable consideration. It was the bait. I would sell it to them as a protective measure, a way to hide the house from the government seizure I was going to invent. Layer 2. The Property Management Agreement. This document appointed Aspen Roberts as the sole property manager with exclusive and irrevocable authority to handle all tenancy, maintenance, and financial decisions for the holding company. This was the lock. Once they signed the deed, the company owned the house. Once they signed this, I controlled the company. Layer 3. The sworn statement. This was the blade. I drafted it to look like a standard affidavit of solvency or a non-fraudulent transfer certificate, the kind of boring legal boilerplate people skim over at closing tables. I filled it with dense legalese about indemnification and hold harmless clauses, but buried in paragraph 4, subsection B, I inserted the confession. The grantors, Douglas and Patricia Roberts, and beneficiary, Sloan Roberts, hereby acknowledge that funds derived from Larkspire Collective, LLC, were utilized for the improvement and maintenance of the subject property, specifically regarding roofing and cellar renovations. Furthermore, the undersigned acknowledged that credit facilities and loan guarantees in the name of Aspen Roberts were established with their full knowledge and consent for the benefit of the family estate. It was phrased as a defensive clause, something to protect the LLC from future liability. I would explain it as, this just tells the lawyers that the money used for the house repairs was family money, so the new company isn't liable for old debts to them. It would look like a shield against creditors. In reality, it was a notarized admission of embezzlement, identity theft, and fraud. If they signed this, they were handing me the nail for their own coffin. I printed the documents. The printer hummed rhythmically, spitting out page after page of warm, crisp paper. I collated them carefully, deed on top, management agreement in the middle, the sworn statement, the kill shot, tucked near the back. Just before the signature pages, I checked my watch. 6 a.m. I picked up my phone and saw a text from Dana Klein. Confirmed for 8 p.m. Rate is triple. Cash preferred. I assume this is a don't ask, don't tell situation? I typed back. Standard residential transfer. Just bring your stamp and your logbook. Do not engage in small talk. Dana was a professional. She didn't care about family drama. She cared about verified IDs and clear signatures. That was exactly what I needed. Now, I had to prepare the psychological stage. My parents were arrogant, but they weren't stupid. They wouldn't sign over a $2 million house just because I asked nicely. I had to terrify them. I opened a new document and began to script my pitch. I needed to simulate a fire so they would jump out of the window, right into my net. Key terms to use: asset forfeiture, federal restitution, immediate seizure. I would tell them that because the tax fraud involved federal wires. The government could bypass the standard court process and freeze all personal assets immediately upon filing charges. I would tell them the house was the first target because the stolen funds were traced directly to the roof and the wine cellar. I would tell them the only way to save the equity was to move the title into a blind trust or a holding company before I officially confessed to the crime tomorrow. If the house was no longer in their name when the charges dropped, the government couldn't touch it. It was legally dubious advice at best. Technically, it was a fraudulent conveyance, but they wouldn't know that. They would only hear, "save the house." They were so used to bending the rules that they would assume this was just another clever loophole. I spent the next hour rehearsing. I stood in the reflection of the dark office window, practicing my posture. I had to look defeated. I had to look like the scared daughter who was trying to be helpful one last time before she went to prison. Shoulders hunched, eyes downcast, voice trembling just enough to sell the fear, but steady enough to explain the legal solution. I found a way to save the estate. I practiced whispering. "I can take the fall, but you have to protect the assets first." It was perfect. It played directly into their narcissism. Of course, Aspen would try to save them. That was what Aspen was for. Finally, I logged back into the credit bureau. I had one loose end to tie up. If they got suspicious in the middle of the night, or if they tried to open a new line of credit to pay off a lawyer, it could complicate things. I initiated a credit freeze on my own files. Then, using the data I had harvested from my father's management of my identity, I accessed the profiles they had created for me. I changed the recovery email from his address to a new, burner account I controlled. I changed the alert phone number. I locked the doors to the financial house they had built in my name. From this moment on, no new accounts could be opened, no new loans. The bleeding stopped now. I packed the documents into a plain folder, no branding, no logos, just a stack of paper about half an inch thick. I held it in my hands. It felt light, flimsy even, just wood pulp and toner. But as I ran my thumb over the edge of the pages, I knew I was holding something heavier than the foundation of 12 Oak Creek Lane. I was holding their confession. I was holding the deed to my freedom. I walked out of the co-working space into the gray dawn. The air was cold, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel the chill. I got into my car, placed the folder on the passenger seat, and drove toward the county clerk's website on my phone to book an appointment. Tomorrow morning, at 9 sharp, I would be standing at the recording desk. By 9:15, Juniper Ridge Holdings would be the legal owner of my childhood home. But first, I had to survive dinner. I started the engine. "Showtime," I said. I pulled into the driveway at 7:55. The house looked like a lantern in the dark, every window blazing with light. From the gravel drive, I could see through the bay window of the living room. Sloane was pacing back and forth, clutching a glass of wine, wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my car. She looked like a trapped bird beating its wings against a golden cage. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I ruffled my hair to make it look unkempt. I rubbed my eyes until they were slightly red. I needed to look like a woman who had spent the last 24 hours crying, not plotting a hostile takeover. I grabbed the plain manila folder and stepped out. The air was crisp, silent, and indifferent. I walked up the stone steps and opened the door. The conversation inside stopped instantly. My father was standing by the fireplace, nursing a scotch. My mother was sitting on the sofa, her posture rigid. Sloane stopped mid-stride and looked at me with wild, desperate eyes. "Well?" Douglas asked. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was. He just wanted the transaction. I let my shoulders slump. I walked into the center of the room and looked down at my shoes. "I will do it," I whispered. Sloane let out a sob of relief and collapsed onto the ottoman. "Oh, thank God. Thank God. Aspen, you are saving my life. Seriously." "I will do it," I repeated, raising my head slowly to look at Douglas. "But there is a problem, a big one." The air in the room shifted. My father's eyes narrowed. "What problem?" "We have the confession ready for you to sign." "I did some reading," I said. keeping my voice shaky. About federal sentencing guidelines and restitution. We will pay for a lawyer, my mother interjected quickly. We told you that. It is not about the lawyer, I said. It is about the assets. If I confess to embezzlement and fraud, the government does not just send me to prison. They look for the money. They do a forensic audit to see where the stolen funds went. I paused, letting the silence stretch. I looked at the ceiling, then at the floor, the mud. I saw the records. Dad, the money from Larkspire. It paid for the new slate roof. It paid for the wine cellar renovation. It paid for your country club dues. Douglas stiffened. So, I continued, that is called proceeds of crime, under federal forfeiture laws. If the government can prove the house was improved with stolen money, they can seize the house. They will call it an asset of the criminal enterprise. I saw the color drain from my mother's face. She looked around the room, at the expensive art, the curtains, the life she had curated so carefully. They cannot take our house, Patricia whispered. It is our home. They can, I lied. Well, it was a half-lie. They could, but only if I dragged them down with me. And if I confess tomorrow, the investigation starts immediately. By the time Sloane walks down the aisle, there could be a federal seizure notice taped to the front door. Imagine what the Kingsleys would think of that. Sloane made a choked sound. No, that cannot happen. Ethan's parents are coming for brunch on Sunday. We cannot have the feds here. Douglas set his glass down. The ice clinked against the crystal. What is the solution? Aspen? You clearly have one. I nodded, swallowing hard as if I were terrified. I lifted the manila folder. We have to move the asset, tonight, before I turn myself in. I opened the folder and spread the documents on the coffee table. I set up a holding company, Juniper Ridge Holdings, LLC. It is anonymous. If you transfer the house to this company tonight, it separates the property from your names. Then, I sign a management agreement to oversee it. Since I am the one taking the blame, it makes sense for me to manage the asset. If the feds look, we can say I was trying to make restitution by placing the house in a trust to pay back the investors. It looks like cooperation, not evasion. It saves the house. Douglas picked up the deed. He read it over. His brow furrowed. Juniper Ridge Holdings. And you manage this? I have to, I said, my voice trembling. If you manage it, it looks like you are hiding assets. If I manage it, it looks like the criminal is handing over collateral. It is the only way to keep the house safe and keep the Kingsleys out of it. He hesitated. I could see the gears turning. He did not like losing control, even on paper. And this? He pointed to the third document, the sworn statement, the trap. That is a standard non-contest affidavit, I explained quickly. It just states that everyone agrees to this transfer and that no one will challenge it later. It is for Sloane's protection mostly, so the Kingsleys cannot say we were moving money around illegally. It validates the transfer as a family decision. I looked at Sloane. You need to sign it too. Sloane, to show you have no claim on the property that conflicts with the restitution. I will sign anything, Sloane said, reaching for a pen. I just want this over. Wait, Douglas said. He looked at me, searching for a crack in the facade. Why are you doing this? Helping us save the house? I looked him dead in the eye and channeled every ounce of pain I had felt for 20 years. Because I am the Roberts' daughter too, I said softly. And because I do not want to see everything you built destroyed just because of a mistake. He stared at me for a long moment. Then, he nodded. The arrogance returned. He believed it. He believed I was still the loyal dog, kicking up dirt to cover their tracks. Good girl, he said. The doorbell rang. That is the notary, I said, checking my watch. I called a mobile service. We need to make it official tonight so I can file the recording first thing in the morning. I went to the door and let Dana Klein in. She was wearing a beige trench coat and carrying a heavy black bag. She looked efficient and bored. Perfect. Good evening, Dana said. not smiling. I have an appointment for a property transfer? Right here, I said, leading her to the living room. The next 10 minutes were a blur of mechanical precision. Dana checked their driver's licenses. She logged the details in her journal. Sign here, she said, pointing to the deed. Douglas signed. Patricia signed. Sign here, she said, pointing to the sworn statement. Sloan signed, her hand shaking. Douglas signed. Patricia signed. They were not reading the text. They were just looking at the sign here stickers. They were signing a document that explicitly stated they knew about the fraud and had benefited from it. They were signing a confession that admitted the roof and the cellar were paid for with stolen funds, and that they had authorized the use of my credit. They were signing their own death warrants, and they thought they were signing a receipt. Dana raised her stamp. Thud. The sound echoed in the silent room. Thud. The deed was notarized. Thud. The management agreement was notarized. Thud. The sworn statement was notarized. That is everything, Dana said, packing up her seal. I will leave the copies here. I will walk you out, I said. I walked Dana to the door. I handed her an envelope with 3 times her usual fee in cash. Thank you, I said quietly. You have no idea how much you just helped me. She nodded, pocketed the envelope, and walked into the night. I closed the heavy front door and locked it. The click of the deadbolt felt final. I walked back into the living room. My father was stacking the papers. A look of satisfaction on his face. He felt safe. He felt like he had won. He had his house. He had his scapegoat. And he had his daughter's wedding secured. He looked up at me. The mask of the concerned father slipped off, replaced by his usual sneer. Well, he said, taking a sip of his scotch, I suppose that is that. Make sure you are at the police station by 10 tomorrow. We do not want to keep the lawyers waiting. He paused, then added the kicker. You know, Aspen, for all your mediocrity, you handled this well. It is the first time you have actually been useful to this family. The words hung in the air. Useful, not loved, not appreciated. Useful, like a plunger, like a mop. I stood there, watching them. Sloan was pouring herself another drink. Patricia was already fluffing the pillows, erasing the evidence of the disturbance. They were moving on. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen. The recording app had been running for 45 minutes. I hit stop and then save. I walked over to the coffee table and placed the phone down, right next to the notarized stack of papers. Thank you, Dad, I said. My voice was different now. The tremble was gone. The hesitation was gone. It was the voice I used when I was deposing a hostile witness. It was cold, clear, and sharp as a scalpel. What? Douglas asked, frowning. I said thank you, I repeated. I reached out and picked up the stack of documents. The deed, the agreement, the confession. I tapped them against the table to straighten the edges. Useful, I mused. That is an interesting word. I think you will find I am very useful. I looked at Sloan, then at my mother, and finally rested my gaze on my father. By the way, I said, a small, cold smile touching my lips. You should probably start packing, because as of 5 minutes ago, this house isn't yours anymore. The county clerk's office opened at exactly 9 in the morning. I was the first person in line, holding a cup of black coffee that tasted like victory. I slid the documents under the glass partition to a woman named Barbara, who looked like she had seen every variety of human desperation and greed that real estate could offer. She did not blink at the quitclaim deed. She did not pause at the sworn statement. She simply checked the notary seal, verified the formatting, and calculated the recording fee. That will be $150, she said. I swiped my debit card. The machine beeped. Then came the sound I had been dreaming of since I drove away from the house the night before. Ka-chunk. The stamp hit the paper. Recorded. Here is your certified copy, Barbara said, sliding the heavy paper back to me. I walked out of the government building into the bright morning sunlight. The air felt different. The gravity had shifted. Technically, The bricks and mortar of 12 Oak Creek Lane were now the property of Juniper Ridge Holdings, LLC. And I was Juniper Ridge Holdings, LLC. I sat on a bench outside and pulled out my phone. It was time to drop the bomb. I composed an email addressed to Douglas, Patricia, and Sloan. I attached the scanned, stamped copy of the deed. The subject line was simple: Notice of change in ownership/property inspection. The body of the email was professional, cold, and stripped of any familial warmth. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Roberts, please be advised that ownership of the property located at 12 Oak Creek Lane has been successfully transferred and recorded with the county. As the authorized manager of the new owner, Juniper Ridge Holdings, I am hereby notifying you that all future communication regarding the property must be directed to me in writing. Furthermore, I have initiated a freeze on all credit profiles associated with my name and filed a formal identity theft affidavit regarding the unauthorized accounts listed in the attached addendum. I hit send. Then, I opened the Federal Trade Commission's identity theft portal on my browser. I didn't just freeze the credit. I nuked it. I marked every single account my parents had opened, the credit cards, the business loans, the roofing financing, as fraudulent. I uploaded the sworn statement they had signed the night before as evidence. In that document, they had admitted to using the funds for the house. By signing it, they had essentially confessed that the debts were their responsibility, not mine. The banks would now go after the beneficiaries of the fraud to recover their money. My phone rang. It was Douglas. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Patricia. Voicemail. Then Sloan. I waited 10 minutes. I wanted them to stew. I wanted them to read the documents and realize that the paper cage they thought they built for me had just locked from the outside. I finally drove back to the house. I didn't park in the driveway. I parked on the street, like a visitor, or a landlord. When I walked up the path, the front door flew open. My father stood there, his face a color of purple I had never seen before. He looked like he was vibrating with rage. "You ungrateful little witch!" he roared, stepping out onto the porch. "What did you do? I just got an alert from the bank. They froze the business line." "Good morning, Douglas," I said, stopping at the bottom of the steps. I didn't call him Dad. "I assume you received the email." "Is this a joke?" he spat. "You think you can steal my house?" "I did not steal anything," I said, holding up the certified copy of the deed. "You signed it over. You, Mom, and Sloan. It was notarized. It is public record now. The house belongs to the holding company." "I will call the police," he screamed. "I will tell them you tricked us. I will tell them it was fraud." "Go ahead," I said, my voice steady. "Call them. Tell them you signed a deed in front of a licensed notary. Tell them you read and signed a sworn affidavit admitting that you used stolen funds to pay for the roof over your head. Please, call the police. I am sure they will be very interested in why you signed a confession if you were innocent." My mother appeared in the doorway behind him, looking pale and ghostly. "Aspen, why are you doing this? We are your family." "Family?" I laughed. A short, sharp sound. Family does not steal their daughter's identity to buy a wine cellar. Family does not threaten to send their child to prison for 2 years so the other child can have a wedding. Sloan pushed past them, running down the steps in her pajamas. She looked frantic. "You have to give it back. You have to undo it. Ethan's lawyers will see this. If I do not have the house as an asset in the trust, the prenuptial agreement changes. You are ruining my wedding." "I am not ruining anything. Sloan," I said, "I am securing the asset. Remember? That was the plan." "I want it back," she shrieked, grabbing my arm. I pulled away sharply and held up my phone. I tapped the screen. Sloan's voice, clear and pathetic, drifted out of the speaker. 2 years in minimum security won't kill you." Sloan froze. Her mouth snapped shut. She stared at the phone as if it were a loaded gun. "I have the rest of the conversation too," I said softly. "The part where you admit you knew about the loans, the part where Dad plans the cover-up, if you try to sue me, or if you try to lie to the Kingsleys about this, I will email this audio file to Ethan, and then I will email it to his mother." Sloane took a step back, defeated. She knew the game was over. She knew that audiophile was a nuclear bomb that would vaporize her social standing in seconds. Douglas was leaning against the doorframe, breathing heavily. He realized that calling the police was impossible. The notary had verified their identities. They had signed voluntarily. If he claimed fraud now, he would have to explain the underlying crimes they were trying to hide. He was checkmated by his own signature. "What do you want?" Douglas asked, his voice gritty. "Money? Is that it? Blackmail?" "I do not want your money," I said, "mostly because you do not have any. You have been living on credit stolen from me." I pulled a document from my bag. "This is a notice to quit," I said. "Since you are no longer the owners, you are technically tenants at will, and since I am the manager of the company, I am terminating your tenancy." "You are evicting us?" my mother gasped, clutching her chest. "From our own home? Aspen, I gave birth to you." "Giving birth is a biological function, not a license to commit identity theft," I snapped. "You have 30 days to vacate. That is the legal minimum." I paused, looking at the house that had never felt like home. "However," I continued, "I know you are messy when you are angry. I do not want you punching holes in the walls or stripping the copper wiring, so I am offering you a deal. It is called cash for keys." "What?" Douglas asked. "I will give you $5,000, I said. "If you are out in 7 days, and if you leave the property in broom-swept condition, no damage, no missing fixtures, you take your clothes and your furniture, and you get out." "5,000? Douglas laughed bitterly. "This house is worth $2 million. "The house is owned by the LLC, I reminded him. "You own nothing. 5,000 is enough to rent a condo and pay for a moving truck. Take it or leave it. If you stay the full 30 days, you get nothing. And I will have the sheriff escort you out on day 31. My mother started to cry. Real tears this time. "Aspen, please, think about what you are doing. You are sending your father into the street. He has a heart condition." "He has a spending condition," I corrected. "And frankly, I am being generous. I could have gone to the FBI this morning. I could have handed them the sworn statement and the recording. You would be in handcuffs right now." I turned to leave. But my father's voice stopped me. It was a low, guttural growl. "You think you are so smart," he said, "but you are still the one listed on those loans. You are still the guarantor. When this house is gone, they will come for you. You are going to end up in prison anyway." I stopped. I turned back slowly. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike and then taught me that I was worthless. "No, Douglas," I said. "I spoke to my lawyer this morning. We are filing for injunctive relief based on the identity theft evidence. The banks will not come for the victim. They will come for the perpetrators who signed the affidavit admitting they used the funds." I smiled, and it felt like ice cracking. "I am not going to prison. The person going to prison is the one who signed the confession." I got into my car and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I saw them standing on the porch of a house that no longer belonged to them, 3 small figures shrinking into the distance. The silence following the eviction notice did not last long. In high society, silence is often just the deep breath before the scream, and the Kingsleys were not the type of family to let a scream go unheard. They were the kind of people who treated a marriage like a corporate merger, and in any merger, the due diligence phase is where the skeletons come dancing out of the closet. 3 days after I recorded the deed, the Kingsleys' private family office sent a formal request to Sloane. They wanted a clarification of assets prior to finalizing the prenuptial agreement. Apparently, someone, perhaps a little bird, or perhaps a public record search algorithm, had flagged the sudden transfer of the Roberts family estate into a mysterious LLC. Sloane called me in a panic that could shatter glass. She was hyperventilating, claiming that Ethan's father had hired a forensic accounting firm. She said our parents were trying to spin a narrative that I was a mentally unstable, jealous sister who had manipulated them into signing away the house during a moment of family vulnerability. They were painting me as the villain, the bitter spinster trying to sabotage the golden couple. I expected this. In fact, I was counting on it. I did not wait for them to drag my name through the mud at the country club. I went on the offensive. I called the offices of Thorne and Sterling, the law firm representing the Kingsley Family Trust. I told the receptionist I had critical documentation regarding the solvency of the Roberts estate, and that I would only speak to Marcus Thorne, the senior partner. I got an appointment for 2 in the afternoon. I walked into the conference room wearing my sharpest blazer, carrying nothing but a slim portfolio. Marcus Thorne sat at the head of a glass table that looked long enough to land a plane on. Ethan Kingsley was there too, sitting in the corner, looking less like a groom and more like a man watching a car crash in slow motion. "Miss Roberts," Thorne said, his voice dry as parchment, "your parents claim you coerced them into transferring their home to a shell company. They claim you are unwell." "My parents are under a great deal of stress," I said calmly. "However, I am a certified asset tracing analyst. I deal in facts, not feelings. And the fact is, the transfer was not coercion, it was a rescue mission." I slid the certified copy of the sworn statement across the glass. "This is an affidavit signed by Douglas, Patricia, and Sloane Roberts," I said. "It was notarized 3 nights ago. Please direct your attention to paragraph 4. Thorne put on his reading glasses. Ethan leaned forward, his brow furrowed. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. "It states here," Thorne read aloud, "that the undersigned acknowledge funds derived from Larkspire Collective, LLC, were utilized for home improvements, and that Sloane Roberts certifies she had full knowledge of these expenditures." Thorne looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Sloane told us she had no idea how the company finances were managed. She said she was just the creative director." "Her signature says otherwise," I said softly. "She signed a legal document admitting that investor money from people in your social circle, went into her parents' slate roof and wine cellar. She admitted she knew." Ethan stood up. He walked over to the table and stared at the paper. He stared at the looping, elegant signature of the woman he was supposed to marry in 3 weeks. It was the same signature she used on birthday cards and Valentines, but here it was a confession. "She knew," Ethan whispered. "It wasn't a question. She lied to me. She looked me in the face last night and said she was innocent. I am not here to stop the wedding," I said, standing up. "I am here to clear my name. I will not be the scapegoat for their financial housekeeping. If you have further questions about the debt structure, I suggest you ask Sloane about the $50,000 loan she defaulted on, the one she guaranteed with my identity." I left the room before they could ask anything else. I didn't need to see the explosion. I just needed to light the fuse. By 6 in the evening, the Roberts house, or rather, the house they were currently renting from me for $5,000, was in chaos. My father called, begging to meet. He didn't scream this time. He pleaded. I agreed to meet them at a neutral location, a quiet diner on the edge of town. They looked 10 years older than they had a week ago. Douglas's hands were shaking. Sloane's eyes were swollen shut from crying. "Ethan is asking for a pause," Sloane choked out. "He says he needs to reevaluate. You have to fix this. Aspen, you have to tell them the document was a mistake." "It was not a mistake," I said, sipping my iced tea. "It was the truth." "We will pay you," Douglas said, leaning across the sticky table. His voice was a desperate rasp. "We will pay you whatever you want. Just retract the statement. Tell them you forged the signature. We will get you a lawyer. We will pay you $10,000, $20,000. You do not have $20,000, I pointed out. You have $40,000 in credit card debt in my name. You have a defaulted business loan. You have a house you no longer own. You are offering me money you do not have to fix a problem you created." "We will get it," Patricia insisted. "Once the wedding happens, once the merger goes through." "There is no merger," I said. Not until you clean the ledger. I reached into my bag and pulled out another set of documents. I am not retracting anything, but I will offer you a lifeline. If you want me to stop releasing information to the Kingsleys, you need to sign this. I pushed the papers toward them. What is it? Douglas asked suspiciously. It is a debt assumption and repayment agreement, I explained. It lists every single credit card and loan you opened in my name. It states that you accept full legal liability for these debts. It states that you committed identity theft to acquire them, but that I am graciously allowing you to assume the debt rather than pressing criminal charges immediately. You want us to admit to identity theft again? Douglas hissed. I want you to take the debt off my name, I said. Legally, bindingly, if you sign this, I can take it to the banks and remove myself as the guarantor. The debt becomes yours, my credit score heals, and in exchange, I will not send the audio recording of you planning to frame me to Ethan's mother. They froze. They had forgotten about the recording, or maybe they hoped I was bluffing. You wouldn't, Patricia whispered. Try me, I said. Dana is waiting in the parking lot. I waved through the window. Dana Klein, my favorite mobile notary, was sitting in her car. She stepped out and walked into the diner, clutching her official logbook. The second signing was grim. There was no pretense of family unity this time. It felt like a surrender ceremony. Sloan tried to lean in toward Dana as she was verifying the driver's licenses. You know, Sloan whispered, putting on her best socialite smile. This is all just a silly misunderstanding. My sister is very dramatic. Is there any way we can adjust the wording on the date? Dana didn't even look up. Ma'am, step back. I am here to witness signatures, not rewrite history. If you attempt to influence the notarization process, I will have to void the transaction and note the interference in my state log. Sloan recoiled, as if she had been slapped. One by one, they signed. They assumed the debt. They admitted the theft. They released me. Dana stamped the pages. Thud, thud, thud. Thank you, I told them, gathering the papers. I will file these with the creditors tomorrow. Do not worry about the rent for this week. Consider it covered. I walked out of the diner, leaving them sitting in the fluorescent light, staring at the plastic menu holders. I got into my car and checked my phone. It was 8 o'clock. Ethan Kingsley would be at his family's estate, probably sitting in his study, nursing a drink and wondering who he was really marrying. I opened my email app. I had drafted the message hours ago. It was sent from an anonymous Proton Mail account. The subject line was, "Something you should hear before the rehearsal dinner." Attached was the audio file. I hesitated for a split second. This was the final blow. This would not just stop the wedding. It would incinerate the social standing of the Roberts family for a generation. It would leave them with nothing but the debt they had just signed for. But then I remembered the dossier on the desk. I remembered the casual way my mother said 2 years in prison wouldn't kill me. I remembered the years of eating instant noodles while they drank vintage wine paid for with my credit score. I hit send. Somewhere in a mansion across town, a phone buzzed, and the house of cards began its final, magnificent collapse. The morning I walked into the office of my newly retained counsel, a sharp-edged litigator named Sarah Vance. I was no longer playing the role of the victim. I was the star witness in a case I had built against my own blood. I handed over a hard drive containing the digital autopsy of the Roberts family finances. It had everything. The original bank statements showing the flow of funds from Larkspire Collective to the roofing contractors, the emails from my father's account authorizing the use of my social security number, the audio recordings of them plotting to frame me, and most importantly, the notarized affidavits they had signed under the belief that they were saving themselves. Sarah reviewed the file in silence for 20 minutes. When she looked up, her expression was one of professional admiration mixed with a hint of fear. We filed a preemptive disclosure with the district attorney. The strategy was simple. By coming forward voluntarily with evidence of the fraud, I positioned myself as a cooperating witness rather than a co-conspirator. I was not the mastermind. I was the whistleblower who had been forced to launder the mess to protect my identity. The counter-move from my father came 48 hours later. He hired a defense attorney, a man known for loud suits and louder arguments, who immediately sent a cease and desist letter claiming that the quitclaim deed and the sworn statements were obtained under duress. The letter argued that I had psychologically manipulated elderly parents and a distressed sister into signing away their assets. It was a bold lie, but I had prepared for it. Sarah replied with a single attachment, the affidavit from Dana Klein, the mobile notary. It was a bulletproof shield. Dana testified that she had verified the government-issued IDs of all parties, that she had asked each signer if they were acting of their own free will, and that no one appeared intoxicated or threatened. She noted that Sloan had even attempted to negotiate the wording, proving she was lucid and engaged. Duress requires a lack of agency. My family had plenty of agency. They just had bad judgment. The duress argument died on the desk before it ever reached a judge. Then came the banking twist, the moment where the financial gears began to grind them down. The lender for the defaulted $50,000 business loan finally managed to track me down. I received a demand letter addressed to Aspen Roberts as the personal guarantor. They threatened to garnish my wages. In the past, I would have panicked. This time, I responded with a packet of my own. I sent them the identity theft report I had filed with the Federal Trade Commission, along with the debt assumption agreement my parents had signed in the diner. The logic was undeniable. I was not the borrower. I was the victim of identity fraud. The bank's legal department took one look at the notarized admission of guilt from Douglas and Patricia and realized they were chasing the wrong person. They immediately closed the file on me and opened a fraud investigation into the beneficiaries of the funds. The spotlight shifted. Now, the bank was not looking for a guarantor to pay the bill. They were looking for the people who had spent the money. They turned their gaze toward Larkspire Collective and its officers. Sloan tried to fight back in the only arena she understood: social media. She began posting vague, tearful stories about betrayal and toxic siblings, trying to rally the sympathy of the wedding guest list. She hinted that I was jealous of her happiness and was trying to sabotage her big day. It might have worked if she were marrying a nobody, but she was marrying a Kingsley. The Kingsley family office had a dedicated reputation management team. They did not like messy public feuds. Within hours of Sloan's posts, her account went silent. I learned later that the Kingsley lawyers had issued a gag order as a condition of continuing the prenuptial discussions. They told her to shut up, or the wedding was canceled immediately. The smear campaign was suffocated in its crib. I did not stop there. I filed a civil lawsuit against Douglas, Patricia, and Sloan Roberts. The counts were heavy: identity theft, common law fraud, and unjust enrichment. I also filed for a temporary restraining order, citing the harassment and the fraudulent debts. The term unjust enrichment was my favorite. It was the legal way of saying, you are living in a house with a roof paid for by my stolen credit, and the law demands you pay it back. Desperation makes people stupid, and my parents were very desperate. On a Thursday evening, 2 days after the civil suit was served, my phone alerted me to motion at the front door of the house. I pulled up the camera feed. Douglas and Patricia were standing on the porch of the house they used to own, the house they were now technically renting from me. Douglas was pounding on the door. He looked disheveled. I did not go to the door. I did not yell. I pressed the button on the intercom system, my voice projecting cool and metallic from the speaker. "You are trespassing," I said. "Open this door." "Aspen," my father shouted. "We need to talk. You cannot sue us." "I am the property manager," I replied. "You are tenants who are creating a disturbance. If you do not leave the premises in 3 minutes, I will forward this footage to the police and file for a violation of the pending restraining order. This is your first and final notice." My mother grabbed my father's arm. She looked up at the camera, tears streaming down her face, and performed for the lens. "How can you do this to us? We are your parents." I did not answer. I just watched the timer on the screen. 2 minutes, 1 minute, they left. But my mother was not done. The next morning, she was spotted crying to the neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, telling her that I had stolen the house out from under them. Mrs. Higgins was the head of the Homeowners Association and the town gossip. I decided to cut that thread before it could weave a new narrative. I sent a formal letter to the HOA board. I attached the recorded deed showing Juniper Ridge Holdings as the owner and a copy of the tenant warning I had issued to Douglas and Patricia regarding noise and harassment. The message was clear. These are not poor victims. These are problem tenants who are disputing a legal eviction. The HOA, terrified of legal liability, immediately distanced themselves from my parents. The neighborhood support evaporated. That afternoon, I received a text from an unknown number. Coffee. The Roastery on Main. 10 minutes. Ethan. I went. Ethan Kingsley looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low, trying to be invisible. He didn't look angry. He looked haunted. "Is it true?" he asked as I sat down. "Everything in the audio file. Is it true?" "Yes," I said. "And there is more. The forensic accounting will show that the engagement party was paid for with a line of credit opened in my name 3 years ago." Ethan closed his eyes. He took a long, shaky breath. "I loved her. You know, or I thought I did. I thought she was kind, a bit spoiled. Maybe, but kind." "She is a survivor," I said. "Not unkindly. She was raised to be a product. My parents built her to sell to someone like you. When the funding ran out, they cannibalized me to keep the production going." "Why did you wait until now?" he asked. "Why not tell me 6 months ago?" "Because 6 months ago, I was just the jealous sister," I said. "You would not have believed me. I needed the paper trail. I needed them to admit it in writing. I do not want to destroy your wedding. Ethan, I do not want revenge. I just want my name back. I want to wake up in the morning and not owe $40,000 for a life I never lived." He nodded slowly. He understood. He was a businessman. After all, he understood the difference between malice and necessary defense. "The lawyers are meeting tomorrow," he said, standing up. "My mother is displeased." "I can imagine," I said. "Good luck, Aspen," he said, and walked out. I watched him go. I felt a strange sense of hollowness. There was no joy in this. It was just surgery. Painful, bloody, necessary surgery to cut out a tumor that had been growing for 29 years. I checked my calendar. The date of the wedding was circled in red. Saturday, the 14th. I deleted the event. In its place, I added a new entry for the following Monday. Deposition. United States versus Douglas and Patricia Roberts. The countdown was no longer ticking toward a ceremony. It was ticking toward a courtroom, and unlike my sister, I was ready to walk down the aisle. The rehearsal dinner was held in the private ballroom of the Haven Ridge Country Club, the very same club my father had paid his membership dues for using the stolen funds from my sister's fake company. The room was a suffocating display of white lilies and crystal chandeliers. My parents were seated at the head table, smiling with the brittle, terrified desperation of people who knew the ground beneath them was turning to quicksand. They were playing the role of the perfect American family one last time, hoping that if they smiled wide enough, the truth would not dare to walk through the double doors. I stood in the shadows of the service entrance, watching them. I was not wearing a bridesmaid dress. I was wearing a charcoal suit, sharp and professional. I held a single slim folder in my hand. Ethan Kingsley stood up. He tapped a silver spoon against his champagne flute. The room fell silent. The guests turned their expectant faces toward the groom, waiting for a speech about eternal love and bright futures. "Thank you all for coming," Ethan said. His voice was steady, but there was a coldness in it that made the air temperature drop 10 degrees. "Usually, this is the part where I talk about how lucky I am, where I talk about the beautiful future Sloan and I are building." He paused, looking down at Sloan. She smiled up at him, but her eyes were darting around the room, sensing the predator in the tall grass. "But I cannot build a future on a foundation that does not exist," Ethan continued. "Before we talk about the wedding, we need to talk about the cost." He looked toward the service entrance. "Aspen." I stepped into the light. A murmur rippled through the room. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. My father half rose from his chair, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. "What is she doing here?" Douglas hissed, loud enough for the front tables to hear. "She is unwell. She is not supposed to be here." "She is exactly where she needs to be," Ethan said, his voice cutting through my father's bluster. "Aspen gave me something interesting yesterday. A recording. I think everyone should hear it." Ethan nodded to the audio technician in the corner. I had sent the file ahead of time. The speakers crackled for a second. Then, my mother's voice filled the ballroom. Clear, reasonable, and monstrous. 2 years in minimum security won't kill you. Aspen. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy and physical. Every guest froze. The servers stopped pouring wine. Then came my voice from the recording, sounding small and broken. "You want me to go to prison?" Then Douglas's voice. "It is a first offense. You take the blame. Sloan keeps the wedding. We need this." The audio cut off. My mother looked like she had been struck by lightning. She shrank into her chair, unable to look at the stunned faces of her friends, her neighbors, and the Kingsley family. "That is fake!" Sloan screamed. Standing up so abruptly her chair fell backward with a crash. "She used AI. She faked it because she is jealous. She is trying to ruin me." "It is not fake, Sloan," a deep voice boomed from the other side of the room. Marcus Thorne, the Kingsley family attorney, stepped forward. He placed a document on the table in front of Ethan's parents. "This is a sworn statement of solvency and non-fraudulent transfer," Thorne announced, his voice projecting like a judge's. "It was signed 4 days ago by Douglas, Patricia, and Sloan Roberts. It was notarized by a licensed state official." Thorne opened the folder. In this document, Sloan Roberts admits that funds from her company, Larkspire Collective, were used to pay for the slate roof of the Roberts estate and the wine cellar renovation. She signed her name to the fact that she knew the money was misappropriated. Sloan went pale. She looked at the paper as if it were burning. I didn't read it. I just signed what they told me to sign." "You signed a confession," I said, walking toward the table. "And then, 2 days later, in a diner on Main Street, our parents signed a debt assumption agreement admitting that they stole my identity, opened $40,000 of credit in my name, and defaulted on a $50,000 loan to fund your lifestyle." I placed the second document on the table next to the first. "Identity theft, wire fraud, embezzlement, it is all here, notarized, stamped, undeniable." Ethan turned to Sloan. He looked at her not with anger, but with a profound, exhausting disappointment. "I asked you," he said softly, "I asked you if there was anything else. You looked me in the eye and lied. You let your sister carry a debt that paid for your engagement party." He took off the platinum ring I had seen on his finger. He placed it on the table. "The wedding is off." "No," my mother wailed. "Ethan, please, it is a misunderstanding. We were just trying to protect the family." "You were protecting yourselves," Ethan's father said, standing up. "And in doing so, you exposed us to a federal investigation. The wedding is canceled, and I will be forwarding these documents to the district attorney," Douglas snapped. The humiliation was too much. He lunged across the table, his hand reaching for the stack of damning papers. Reaching for me. "You ungrateful little traitor!" he roared. "Give me those!" I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked him dead in the eye. "Touch me," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And you are adding assault and tampering with evidence to the list of charges. Do you really want to spend the night in a cell? Or do you want to wait for the indictment?" He froze. His hand hovered inches from the papers. He looked around the room and saw the sea of phones raised, recording everything. He saw the security guards moving in. He saw his world ending. He slowly lowered his hand. "Get out," Ethan said to my family. "Get out of my house." That night, there were no sirens. The rich do not do sirens if they can avoid it, but there were process servers. As my parents and Sloan retreated to the house they no longer owned, The investigation formally began. The Bank Fraud Division, armed with my affidavit and the notary's logbook, opened a case file that was 3 inches thick. The fallout was slow, agonizing, and thorough. It took 6 months for the dust to settle. I sat in my new apartment, a place with big windows and no memories. I opened my laptop. The credit score on the screen was a beautiful, boring 750. The fraudulent accounts were gone, scrubbed from my history as if they had never existed. The banks had gone after the true beneficiaries. The house at 12 Oak Creek Lane was sold. Juniper Ridge Holdings liquidated the asset to pay back the creditors. My parents walked away with nothing but their clothes and a suspended sentence that required them to perform 2,000 hours of community service. They moved to a small rental in a different state, far away from the country club. Sloan did not go to prison, but her reputation was dead. She was working as a hostess at a chain restaurant, the only job she could get with a fraud record attached to her background check. I closed the laptop. I had won. I had my name back. I had my life back. They told me that being the scapegoat was my destiny. They told me to be quiet and take the fall. They told me that 2 years in prison would not kill me. They were right. 2 years in prison would not have killed me, but their own signatures? That killed the fake kingdom they lived in. And frankly, watching it burn was worth every penny of the notary fee. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know which country you are in right now. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Morgan Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that notification bell so we can share this story with even more people.